Hey everybody, it's Shelley Tugas here at the Hudson Area Public Library. We are trying to do some new things as we get through our lock-in together. And one of those is a meet and greet with authors from all over the country. And we're launching with S.A Bodeen, also known as S.A Bodeen, whose books you will find all over the library, actually. So thanks for being with us. And Stephanie, thanks so much for taking time and talking to us online. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I think it's what's really interesting about you is how flawlessly you've transitioned among these various age groups as a writer, kind of launching with picture books and Elizabeti's Doll, moving into YA thrillers like The Compound and The Detour and The Tomb, and then also hitting middle grade with the series, the Shipwreck Island series. So let's talk a little bit about that. And the first thing I wanted to hear you talk about is sort of your launch as a writer. First, maybe touch base on how hard you worked to get to the point where you were able to publish Elizabeti's Doll. And tell us how you got the idea for that story and also how you had positioned your writing career up until that point.
Well, I had always wanted to be a writer, and I went to college at UW River Falls, and I started out, I majored in journalism because I really wanted to be a writer, and that was the only major at the time that was writing, and figured out pretty quickly it wasn't the kind of writing I wanted to do. It was, of course, journalism, and so you didn't really get to make anything up. And I did stick with it for a couple years, but then I ended up switching to secondary education. And then writing just became one of those dreams that wasn't ever going to happen. And I graduated from River Falls, got married, went in the Peace Corps. We went to Tanzania in East Africa. And it was an experience that just changed my life, just opened up my view to the world so wide. And we came back and started a family. And of course, I would read picture books to my kids all the time, and every once in a while would read one and just kind of think like, wow, I could come up with a better story than that. And it was just kind of that sort of a thing. Like our local library, I was living out in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, and our local library had an author come in and talk about how she became a picture book author. And I walked away from it thinking, if she can do it, how come I can't? And this was before anybody had computers in their home, before the internet. And so I had a book called Children's Writers and Illustrators Market, and it listed all the publishers, what kind of books they took. And so I just started researching and I started writing. And I thought, what can I write about that's different than everything else out there? And remember my time in Tanzania, and especially an experience I had where I went and lived with a family in a village for a week on my own, and they lived in a mud house. It was literally dirt floors, mud walls, no electricity, no running water. And of course, the family and everyone else in the village were very poor. And the kids played all the time, but they made their own toys. And there was a little girl in my village who had a rock for a doll. And I remember thinking about that, and I came up with the story Elizabeti's Doll, which is about a little Tanzanian girl who has a rock for a doll, and sent it in to publishers. And of course, at that point, it meant typing it up, putting it in an envelope, putting in a SAZY, a self-addressed stamped envelope, and waiting for a few months to get an answer. And I really lucked out. And the third place I sent it to, Lee and Low Books in New York, called about two months after I sent it in and said they wanted to publish it. So they found an illustrator. Christy Hale did the wonderful illustrations. And so that was my first book that came out in 1998. It's a long time ago.
That's awesome. And then you started doing young adult. You had a few picture books, but that's a jump in ages for sure. And what led you there? And your first novel was The Compound. So tell us a little bit about the story of the story.
Well, I was doing picture books, and so I ended up with 7 picture books. But as I was doing the picture books, I had started to write novels for older readers, like young adult, because that was kind of really my dream to begin with. And so I went back and I got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and my project was writing young adult novels. And I also got an agent at that time. And so I had sent him several novels of mine and had been waiting and waiting to hear what he had to say, and got a box from my agent. He had sent all the manuscripts back to me along with a letter saying these are really bad. I'm not even going to try and sell them. And at that point, that was pretty brutal. And so I quit. I'm like, forget it. I'm never writing again. And then I actually signed up. I read about National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, which happens every November. You sign up and you write a 50,000 word novel. That's your goal for the month. So I signed up and I thought this is like my last chance, because I had written 9 novels up to this point and they were all different levels of terrible. And so I thought, what can I write about? And so one thing I'd always been really obsessed with, back in junior high when I was growing up in 8th grade at our school, we had tornado drills and fire drills, and we also had nuclear attack drills. And at the point, it was just one of those things. I always had irrational fears, and so that became another irrational fear of mine, was to worry about a nuclear war. And one time we were down having this drill, and we were kind of down in this room that had no windows, and one of the teachers said, you know, this is crazy. If this really happened, we would have to stay down here for 15 years before it would be safe to go outside. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, what would that be like? And it kind of fueled this obsession, because then I just love to read and watch anything about nuclear war or people surviving. And so when I sat down for National Novel Writing Month, came up with a story about a family. The main character is a 15-year-old boy named Eli, and he and his family have been living in an underground compound for 6 years, so since he was 9. And when they went into the compound, his twin brother was left on the outside. And so that was a story that I wrote for National Novel Writing Month, and it turned out to be, well, the 10th novel that I wrote turned out to be the first one that I sold, The Compound. And so that was pretty exciting.
It's an awesome book. I just love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then we have The Gardener, The Fallout, and The Raft. Do I have the order right there?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have those covers to show us?
I do. Okay. We have, so The Gardener was my second novel, and that is a little bit more sci-fi. And it's about a teenage boy who goes on the run with a girl who's part of a mysterious experiment. And the gardener is a scientist who's trying to get her back. So it's very fast-paced and kind of a lot of weird concepts in there, but it was pretty fun. And then The Raft was my third novel. And this was kind of inspired by a setting, another place that I lived. My family and I lived out on Midway Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for about almost 3 years. When my kids were, we moved out there when my youngest had just finished 2nd grade and my oldest had just started 4th grade. It is a national wildlife refuge now, after being a naval base for decades. And my husband was the refuge manager. So we moved out there, and our kids were the only kids, so I had to homeschool. But it was an absolutely amazing place to live. And the story that came out of it was The Raft, which is about a girl. And we would have to take this little airplane out there, and I would always worry about this thing going down. And so I kind of wrote my nightmare with The Raft, because I put this girl on this flight to Midway on this little plane, and it crashes halfway there, and she has to survive. So I am not very nice to her in that book. She goes through a lot.
She does. So all the young adult novels you did had sort of that traditional publishing path, and then you started doing middle grade, actually, with a 4-book series called Shipwreck Island. Tell us how that came to you, because if you're not sort of in the writing world, this is a little bit of a unique pathway in publishing.
It was I had been wanting to do middle grade for years because I had the picture books for the youngest kids and I had the YA for the older kids, nothing for the middle. And so I kept saying to my agent, I would send him ideas for middle grade stories. And he'd be like, no, you don't want to write middle grade. So then one day he calls and he said, well, I was just talking to your editor and they think you should write middle grade. I really think you should write middle grade. I'm like, okay. And then they actually had an idea for a series. They said, we're really thinking of reboot of Shipwreck of Swiss Family Robinson. So we're thinking kind of like Swiss Family Robinson meets Lost. So I'm a huge Swiss Family Robinson fan from the time I was little, and I'm also a huge Lost fan. So I had to come up with an idea, and I remember we had our first conference call with my editor and her boss and my agent, and we all got on the line, and they're like, so what do you have? And I had basically nothing. So it took me several tries to come up with an outline that they liked, and I knew it was going to be 4 books, but I knew I just had to get the first one written. So I got the first one done, and they really liked it, and then I was kind of like, wow, so now I have to figure out what happens in the next 3. But it turned out okay. It was a struggle, but I actually really like how the story turned out. And it was kind of fun going in, knowing that I would get to be with these same characters for a total of 4 books. And it was a different experience to write, knowing that you had 4 all at once. But I liked it. It was fun.
So there's basically, 4 of you on a conference call?
To start, yeah, and I still remember them being like, so what do you got?
That had to be very intimidating to just be not seeing these faces and just speaking into the void.
Yes, and a little daunting. And of course, it was my editor that I'd already done several books with and my agent, but still it was like you realize the pressure there to come up with something. And it took me, like I said, a few tries to come up with a premise that they really liked. And then it was like scary because I'm like, well, now I'm going to have to follow through with this. And just,
4 times.
Can I do it? Scary.
So I know a lot of authors don't like to talk about their works in progress, but I'm wondering if you will talk about your work in progress. What are you doing now?
Right now, I am working on a book for grown-ups, and it's a thriller, and it's unlike other things that I've done. Also, it's different in that when you write for a younger audience, you're always thinking about, because it's not like, I, of course, think about my audience, like the kids who will be reading it, but I also have to keep in mind the gatekeepers. So I have to keep in mind the teachers, the librarians, the parents, because chances are it's going to have to go through them and pass their, their standards before it gets in the kid's hand. It's not like adults who just walk into a bookstore and buy whatever they want. Kids typically will have to ask their parents to buy it, or will have to go in the library and be able to check it out. So you have a lot of people you have to satisfy, whereas with the books for grown-ups, I get to just write to the audience because I know that there aren't all those gatekeepers who are sort of approving that this book is okay for a certain age group. So that's been kind of fun to just be able to kind of do whatever I want without really having all these voices in the back of my head.
That does sound like a fun change of pace, for sure. So we're all dealing with being this sort of locked-in lifestyle, and it's hard on everybody, kids especially, I think. But as a writer, is it something that is helping you because you aren't distracted by a lot of other things, or is it really a hindrance?
It's been a little weird. The first week and a half, things weren't really different because I often am home alone all day anyway. And then because I had my husband home and because it was just kind of a weird vibe going on all across the world, it was kind of like I just didn't want to do anything. I just kind of wanted to sit there and watch the news, and it was just kind of weird. And now I'm finally back in gear and working on this book every day, and it's actually going pretty well. I'm just trying to focus and get it done.
Yeah, sure. You lived in Hudson for what, 6, 7 years?
5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, they went really fast.
Yeah, it absolutely did. So you've been away for about a year, a little over a year?
It'll be 2 years in June.
Okay. So I think it'll be fun for people who are watching this, who are library patrons. Tell us a little bit about some of your favorite Hudson hotspots, some of the favorite things you did here, what you miss about Hudson.
Well, I was always at the library, and I usually had some hefty library fines because I tend to be pretty bad about bringing books back on time. But I was at the library all the time, and I was at the YMCA all the time, and some places I really liked. I miss Hudson a lot. We had really good friends there, and I was at the bookstore. I was at Chapter 2 a lot. I was popping in there, and I really liked the Purple Treat. I would go there for gifts all the time for people, so I really miss that too. And a lot of good restaurants in Hudson. I hope people realize how lucky they are, just the variety. I remember we would be like, well, should we go out to eat tonight? And then it was like deciding where to go. And where we live now is a small town and not a lot of options. I really cook 95% of the time. Now I cook 100% of the time. But so, yeah, there's a lot of things I miss about Hudson. It's a great place to live, and I'm glad we got the chance to live there for a while.
You would be pretty stunned to drive downtown and just see the empty lots and a couple of people walking in the park, and in the middle of the day to not see cars everywhere and lines at the red light. It's really very surreal right now.
Yeah, just to even my little town, you drive around and there's nobody in, like, I was at the post office the other day because I had to mail something, and there were like 4 cars out front. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to wait out here until some of those people leave because that's just too many people. And
Right, for sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to do this with us. You're our first, so the perfect launch for our series that we're doing. And good luck with your book.
thank you so much. It was great to have a chance to chat. And
Okay.